お前らも今回り右すりゃ無事に帰れる。さもなきゃこれから起きることは全部お前らの選んだ結果だ。
To call RGG Studios ambitious would be an understatement on the level of calling a nest of hornets a cuddly woodly love pile. In other words, RGG Studios has a nasty habit of biting off more than they can chew at times. So when they announced they were going to be releasing 3 separate titles within the span of a single year, all of my red flags went up. They told me to be cautious about RGG's 2023 lineup. 3 entries with 2 of them being nearly back-to-back? That's a recipe for disaster. It goes without saying, at least one of these is going to suffer for it. We have confirmation on how long Gaiden took to develop straight from the producer's mouth. In an interview with Automaton, Masayoshi Yokoyama, now in charge of the entire Like a Dragon franchise, estimated development for Gaiden to have taken just about a half year to complete. Needless to say, this isn't much time, but it isn't out of the question for your usual RGG entry. They've made these games on short schedules before. Still, 6 months is really short. Catastrophically short. Yokoyama also insisted Gaiden was much shorter than your typical RGG Studios entry. He wasn't lying. Whereas most RGG games end up around the 60 to 80 hour mark if you're doing sub-stories and the like, Gaiden is much shorter. Just about 20 to 30 hours, and that's if you're aiming for a completionist playthrough. My personal playtime was about 18 hours with most sub-stories done. Even the name, Like a Dragon Gaiden, implies what we're engaging with is a side story, a spin-off, a small detour to explain Kiryu's whereabouts during the events of Like a Dragon 7. In fact, Yokoyama even admitted to Gaiden being an extrapolation of what could have been a short segment in the upcoming Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. And to drive it all home, it's even being sold at a lesser price than your standard RGG title. Make no mistake, RGG Studios made every attempt to set expectations low for Gaiden, and were pretty transparent about what exactly players were going to get out of it. However, this didn't stop us from speculating. RGG Studios forgot 2 important details players ran away with. Gaiden marks Kiryu's return as a protagonist, and also reveals to us what's happened to him since Yakuza 6. Now, if you've been watching this video series, then I don't need to tell you I didn't like Yakuza 6 very much, and apparently I'm not alone in feeling this way. For many players, Like a Dragon Gaiden wasn't just a little story about a character we haven't seen in a while. It was an opportunity to course correct away from the narrative choices in 6 players were unhappy with. A chance to bring Kiryu back in bombastic fashion. A lot, and I mean a lot of players, at least Western players, saw Gaiden as the apology for how they ended Kiryu's story and expected it to serve as a retcon or some kind of redo. And this is why, as we examine Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, we need to keep it all into perspective. Not to excuse Gaiden for its misses and missteps, but to emphasize why games shouldn't be made this way. So keep this all in mind as we go through the ins and outs of Gaiden. Remind yourself of its short development time and what it promised versus what players wanted. Because it brings into question many of the choices made to bring this all together. To deliver us what I feel really could have been a half-hour string of cutscenes in Infinite Wealth. Fighting in Like a Dragon Gaiden feels good, but not as good as Lost Judgment, and judging by Kiryu's agent style, I don't think we're getting another Judgment title anytime soon. Agent style, while being touted as a completely original fighting style for Kiryu, actually harkens back to Yagami's technical form of taking down opponents. The rush combo mimics Yagami's Tiger style, and when in extreme heat, it's almost a carbon copy of Crane style. But it feels a bit stiff. There's a lot of wind-up to some of the finishers, so enemies easily slap you out of combos right at the end of them. This feels like an attempt by RGG Studios to blend together Judgment's excellent fighting polish into Like a Dragon, and essentially take what it can get from Judgment before having to abandon it entirely. After all, there's no point in saving Yagami's fighting styles for the next Judgment title if one isn't happening. This is me speculating, but that's what Retrospective turns into when we catch up to a series. We speculate towards the future now, accuracy be damned. To separate Kiryu's new fighting style from Yagami's, it's equipped with a number of special gadgets. The gadgets of Agent style are neat, but due to the way fighting flows in Like a Dragon, can be kind of useless. The Firefly Mine is powerful, but enemies will often waltz away from it as they naturally attempt to circle you. The Spider Threads, which were the central gadget marketed in Gaiden's trailers, are wholly inconsistent. Sometimes it whips enemies in the wrong direction or doesn't do what you want it to. You have to be very precise in a fighting system designed around being reckless and brutal, and it doesn't mesh well. The Hornet drones take a long time to come out and don't really do much besides pinging enemies for an inconsequential amount of health or making a tiny barrier around Kiryu when you block. There are some exceptions in the gadget lineup. The Serpent rocket shoes are overpowered as hell and barrel through enemies like nothing. They're great when dealing with big crowds and do a ton of damage. Or when you don't feel like fighting enemies at all. And in extreme heat mode, all the gadgets become powerhouse moves, demolishing enemies left and right. So the new Agent style is poorly balanced and a little inconsistent. But remember, this is a shorter game, so poor balance and inconsistency count for a lot more since we have that much less time to acclimate to it. The adjustment period is too long, and in the meantime, you're left with a strong dissatisfaction in Agent style. I'm willing to bet once most players acquire the Yakuza style, Kiryu's old fighting style, they're going to gravitate to it a lot more than Agent. In my experience, I used Agent quite a lot, but almost always switched back into the familiar, tried and true Yakuza style for bosses or whenever things were getting out of control. And you don't really want this from a fighting style in Like a Dragon. Especially when there's only two styles to choose from, you want both to be equally viable and comfortable to play in. You want players to gravitate to one or the other based on preference or playstyle, not because one of them isn't nearly as good as the other. Tsuyoshi Furuta is back to storyboard and scriptwrite, and most people already have an idea of what I'm going to say next. But let's be clear here, dear viewer, this is not your typical Furuta joint. There isn't one fun fact or bit of trivia posing as dialogue in this game. I didn't learn shit. Honestly though, Furuta was kept in check on this one. At the very least, we know he wasn't completely on his own in developing Gaiden's narrative. Yokoyama is credited under story and overall scene direction, and you can feel his presence in much of Gaiden's visual storytelling. Unlike Lost Judgment, where it often felt like characters were sitting around and talking to each other, the body language in Gaiden is much more expressive. People move about the room, no one stands in anyone's spot for too long, and cutscenes are much more concise than we'd expect from a Furuta-ridden story. Unfortunately, we see a lot of storytelling choices from Lost Judgment echoed in Gaiden. The story is frequently interrupted to force players into advancing a subplot with zero consequence to the rest of the main scenario or put them through a tutorial. Other times, secondary and tertiary activities are mandatory to complete before players can continue through the story. I'm honestly not sure who's in charge of making the decision causing the flow of gameplay to occur this way, but they need to be stopped. Part of the charm of a Like a Dragon game is you can interact with just the elements you want. Players have the freedom to engage in side content at their leisure. They don't have to do anything they're not interested in doing. When you force this interaction, you take the joy out of it. It isn't even so much about what they're making you do as much as when they're making you do it. Gaiden, like other entries Furuta is credited with writing, forces the player into these pseudo-side quests right when the main scenario starts to pick up momentum. In other words, when players are the least interested in doing side content. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. When I want to do side content, I'll go do side content. When I want to do the main scenario, it's usually because I've had my fill of side content and just want to move on with the story. When the main scenario then forces me to turn around and do more side content, I get burnt out. It's not just sub-stories and subplots, there's multiple segments of Like a Dragon Gaiden where you're pushed into completing minigames. Even though they're disguised as main scenario progress, they're pretty transparent examples of padding. Things like forcing players to do the inverse Uncanny Valley Cabaret Club, or making them play billiards and golf bingo. It insists the narrative isn't strong enough to exist without these digressions. It's a sign the creators lacked confidence in the main scenario and felt the need to stuff it with fluff. It tells me they're more interested in selling me content than they are telling me a good story. But we have to remember to keep Gaiden in perspective, right? It's much shorter than other Like a Dragons and didn't have a long development cycle, so it's not surprising to see this story structure. There just isn't enough time to fill in all the gaps between every story beat in meaningful ways. Or they could have just made Gaiden even shorter, and I would have been happier for it. In fact, they kind of don't have an excuse here. We have previous standards to compare Gaiden to. Another part of keeping things in perspective is understanding the pivotal reality about smaller RGG Studios productions. They tend to be pretty good. The Kaido Files is a constantly moving, non-stop action mystery. It puts Kaido on a journey through his past, forces him to confront his mistakes, and gives him the opportunity to redeem himself. The Majima Saga is a great piece, fleshing out the eponymous character and blends his many different iterations together, making it the connective tissue Majima needed to bridge his characterization in Zero with the rest of his appearances. Both of these are way shorter than your average Ryu Ga Gotoku title and waste no time in getting across what they want to say. Despite its short length, Gaiden isn't a tight storytelling experience. It feels like 3 different stories stapled awkwardly together into 3 separate acts. Kiryu, Hanawa, and the Daidoji, Nishitani, the castle, and Kiryu, and the events of Like a Dragon 7 relevant to Kiryu and Gaiden's ending, which ties back into Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. The first of these acts struggles to establish a motivation for its resigned protagonist and then moves forward with flimsy results. Gaiden tries to create a relationship between Kiryu and Hanawa in Chapter 1 that will later give more meaning to Kiryu's actions in Chapter 2, but this falls flat because instead of establishing this connection, it uses what little time it has to have Kiryu insist he isn't Kazuma Kiryu for 2 hours.
ずっと俺を桐生と呼んで俺は桐生って男じゃねえ俺はお前らの探している桐生一馬じゃねえ桐生一馬だったらの話だうるさい人違いだと言ってる
Gaiden wants to tell the story of a resigned Kiryu and show him crawling back from the brink of his loss of identity, but we never really get that. We get a codename, Joryu, we get a single mission gone wrong, but we never see the Daidoji truly try to suppress Kiryu's identity or see Kiryu struggle with having to let go of his past. By establishing the character is somewhat at peace with his decisions, Gaiden doesn't show us a journey of a man regaining his sense of self, and more so tells a story of a man just kinda doing stuff. And if this were the point, I'd be happier, but it's not. We're supposed to feel like Kiryu is finding himself again, but the narrative makes no effort to show us his struggle. Instead, Kiryu simply does as he's told, and when he acts defiantly, does so in service of a character we barely know, or at most a character we identify as an antagonist to Kiryu's would-be journey of identity. Hanawa is not there to save Kiryu or help him in any way, so why should we feel bad when he's kidnapped or agree with Kiryu when he wants to go save him? Kiryu might be a guy with a heart of gold, but we're not. The audience needs an actual reason to like this character, to want to save this character. Just because Kiryu wants to is not enough. By the end of this act, we're supposed to believe that Kiryu and Hanawa have formed a bond deeper than friendship. Those are Gaiden's words, not mine.
What was gonna happen if he pulled the trigger?
You have forged a bond beyond rank or title! Shut the fuck up! That is the peak of what any in the Daidoji can hope to reach! Are you bad guys or not? And I just don't see it. Pair this flimsy attempt to establish a relationship between these two with a lot of questions that come about as a result of Kiryu's actions, and you really start to get lost in how any of it makes sense. I suppose it's difficult to write yourself out of the hole you put yourself into in Yakuza 6. The Daidoji faction in general just doesn't make sense as a prolonged entity in this continuity. I kept asking myself why they didn't just kill Kiryu in the first place. You know how you keep secrets secret? You just kill the guy who knows them. Really easy to do when he's already considered dead. You could say it's because Kiryu is more valuable alive, but that also makes little sense as you watch him break protocol over and over again, or constantly get recognized by characters in Gaiden. Even though part of the deal he made with the daidoji was to remain hidden, they constantly send him out to places where people can recognize him. Get this man a desk job! The daidoji have to be masochists. Their entire super secret organization comes under threat every 2 minutes having Kiryu around. The second act is entertaining, but Kiryu is acting completely out of character, with sweeping camera shots of him sitting imposingly on a throne and making sarcastic phone calls. While it's fun within a vacuum, it's a tone-shattering change to the downtrodden hero Act 1 sets up. You typically want a snapping moment or revelation of some kind to give the character an out for behaving differently. Maybe Kiryu can realize he's not hiding his identity well enough. Maybe he gets the idea from someone else. Either of these would have helped transition us into believing this was a Kazuma Kiryu characterization. But Kazuma Kiryu isn't a schemer, nor is he someone who relishes in having the upper hand. I gotta admit, it is still funny to watch him send photos to the villain to upset him. But how are these the actions of a man we just watched ruminate on his life and get his ass kicked in? It just feels like an entirely different game is all. In fact, it kind of feels like a different character was supposed to be the lead on this one. I can easily imagine Yagami or Ichiban doing this sort of thing, but not Kiryu. This is purely speculation, but I think in trying to take what would have been a 30-minute prologue in Infinite Wealth and stretching it out into an entire game's narrative, they borrowed a lot of leftovers of other projects. This second act feels like scraps from a Judgment title, or even a Like a Dragon DLC that never saw the light of day. The third story and final act of Gaiden features some powerful Kiryu character moments and relies heavily on cutscenes from Like a Dragon 7 to deliver a strong finish to an otherwise scatterbrained narrative. And by relies heavily, I mean playing the entirety of a Like a Dragon 7 cutscene and stitching in little bits of Kiryu reacting to what's happening. But it works. It works and it's a strong finish. Kiryu is acting like Kiryu, there's a sweet and tender cutscene where the crying in all those trailers comes from, and despite everything, it feels earned. Gaiden's ending is so strong, in fact, that I don't think the rest of this game needed to exist. Even though the Nishitani storyline is fun, it didn't add a ton of stakes to an outcome we already knew. And that's part of the problem. With stakes so low and the story unable to raise them, Gaiden almost feels like a waste of otherwise strong characters. This leads me to believe they're all going to come back in one way or another in Infinite Wealth, and having this amount of foresight feels bad actually. I feel like this series is becoming too predictable to be exciting in that goofy, over-the-top way anymore. Without proper stakes, the tension Gaiden tries to build rings hollow. Because I know what's going to ultimately happen, I'm not concerned for any of the characters present. Consider Yakuza 0, where the stakes are high not because we don't know what's going to happen to these characters, but because we want to know how those characters become who we recognize them as, and we want them to get there without losing people they care about or losing themselves. We want to know how Majima becomes Majima, but we don't want the how to be something bad happens to Makoto. We want to know how Kiryu becomes Kiryu, but we don't want that journey to be punctuated by him committing murder. We don't want the Dragon of Dojima to be built on a horrible act he can't take back. There are 0 casualties in Like a Dragon Gaiden, something the game telegraphs very early on and doesn't even try to hide, to the point where a character's death is immediately undone in the same cutscene they quote-unquote die in. Nobody needs to die for the stakes to be set, but when you undercut your climactic stings in the same breath, I stop caring about what's going to happen next. Low stakes, but also low in shenanigans, Gaiden might be the first Like a Dragon game to ride the middle ground between serious and silly poorly. And for once, I think this Like a Dragon game should have been way more serious or way goofier to compensate for the lack of stakes and the obvious foreshadowing it does. It needed more of one or the other, and it needed to commit to a singular tone, especially because, again, this was a game developed in 6 months and is significantly shorter than other titles. It can't play the middle ground because it doesn't have time to play the middle ground. It's playing it safe for RGG standards. Instead of aiming for extremes on both ends, it sits squarely in a timid center and bears a great deal of missed opportunity. I don't want to be too hard on Gaiden. I'm mostly frustrated by the amount of meandering in its narrative. To be honest, if you're just looking for more Like a Dragon content, then you're going to be happy with it. It's got the mini games, it's got the side features, it's got the sub-stories, you're not going to go without. Playing Dress Up with Kiryu is a fun addition I hope they bring back for future Like a Dragon titles. The Coliseum has some neat battles referencing old boss fights, and the sub-stories are fun and wacky as they've always been. But if you play the Like a Dragon series and really think about how they make those things inviting and interesting to play, then Gaiden is missing something. The word soulless is too strong, but it lacks the Ryu Ga Gotoku identity because of how it's delivering the usual Like a Dragon accoutrement. Every single sub-story has to be activated through a menu at your hideout before you can engage with it. You don't organically find sub-stories by exploring in Gaiden. It feels less like your character is finding themselves in weird situations, and more bluntly like the game is trying to shove more content into your hands. It turns sub-stories from a world-building feature into a checklist for completion. This sub-story menu is made even stranger by the fact we still have to go to the location of the sub-story anyway. What's the purpose of having this menu in the first place? Why not just have the sub-stories active on the map to begin with? It's such a creatively bankrupt implementation. I think what makes it worse is the side content in Gaiden isn't really optional. In order to level up Kiryu's abilities, you need to accrue Akame points, and to get Akame points, you have to do side content. So you're forced into all of these side activities instead of naturally partaking in them as you adventure across Sotenbori, where most of Gaiden takes place. Which brings us back to the main scenario forcing more side content to be done, which brings us back to the constant checklisting it makes us do, which brings us back to Gaiden trying to artificially extend its lifespan in order to justify its own existence. Had it been a shorter experience tacked onto a mainline entry, I would have enjoyed Gaiden much more. As a standalone offering from RGG Studios, it's a bit of a mess. It's not long enough to tie its plot points together in a cohesive way, and it's too short to be this plotting. It might have everything of a Like a Dragon entry, but it's completely deconstructed and transparently presented to you like generic content to consume. And while the individual pieces perform well and fine on their own, they don't come together in a satisfying way. Again, perspective is important here. RGG Studios has made better, shorter experiences before, and by comparison, those experiences are leagues above what Gaiden provides us. There's a standard they're simply not reaching here, and while the last half of Gaiden is excellent, we also know this last half could have been attached to infinite wealth at no additional cost to us. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the squandered story, it's not worth the half-baked fighting system, and it's not worth the uncreative presentation. But if you want more content, regardless of how it's delivered to you, then you might as well pick up Gaiden, because that's what it is. More content.